This week, I'm going to cover two books with you. I'm going to cover the book of Job, and then in another video, I'm going to take on not the entire book of Psalms, but Psalm 23 in particular. The book of Job is perhaps one of the more underread and under-exegeted books in all of Scripture. Typically, people will go to the book of Job in a time of suffering and they'll look through and pick out a few choice passages from the book of Job. I know that my Redeemer lives and that I will be with him someday. That's a very famous passage. Also, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Those are probably two of the more popular passages in the book of Job. But very seldom do you see anyone take the book of Job and look at it as an entire work. And I'd like to give you just introductory information about the book of Job. It's almost as though when you open the book of Job, it's almost as though you are reading a play. You have three characters. You have God, you have the Hasatan or the Satan, and you have Job. And then there's peripheral characters. There's Job's wife, Job's children, and then Job's friends. But the three main characters that you encounter over and over again, you have the Hasatan or the Satan, you have God himself, and then you have Job. Job is described from the very beginning. You are told Job is blameless, upright, feared God, and shunned evil. What else can you say about a person that would make them more outstanding than that? Blameless. There's not any spot or wrinkle on this man. He is upright. He does that which is right, and he lives that which is right. He fears God, which we know is the beginning of wisdom, and he shuns or runs from evil. So this man has it all together. He has children. And with regard to his children, even if they had not sinned, he acts as the priest over his clan, and he makes sacrifices to purify his children just in case that during one of their parties they did something that was unacceptable. His children, they love to have a party. I mean, what parent would not be delighted to know that their children are getting along with each other and enjoying each other's company? So the brothers and the sisters took turns holding feasts, and the sisters would actually be invited. So this is very unusual in this ancient Near Eastern culture for the sisters to be included as guests to the brothers' party. Job is a man of wealth and influence, and he covered all of his bases. He did what he was supposed to do in order to gain righteous prosperity, and he did what he needed to do in order to maintain righteous prosperity. He had it all. The children, which are the offspring of his life, they're not bad, but somehow they're not quite as amazing as their father is. Maybe they didn't have to work for what they had, or maybe it was given to them with no requirements, but you kind of get the feeling, and I hate to use the word feeling, but you get the idea. It's intimated in the first few verses that Job's children are not bad, but they're just not as amazing as their dad. And it could be because they didn't have to work for their wealth. It could be because they were given privileges without responsibility. We do not know. We just know what we are told in the book. You have the Hasatan, or the Satan. His role is to tempt, much like in the Garden of Eden, and he gets permission to touch Job's possessions. This is a good reminder for all of us that Satan can't touch us without permission. And so the things that touch our lives, there are times when we sin and we open the door for these things to happen, but there are also times when God gives a release for us to go through certain difficulties. So he gets permission to touch Job's possessions, but God is still in control. He knows what he's doing, and Satan is being used by him to accomplish a much higher purpose. Job loses all of his children and all of his wealth in one day. Can you just imagine everything? He didn't lose it over a period of a year or a couple of years. He lost it all in one day. His only response to the loss of all of his wealth, all of his possessions, all of his children, is in verse 21. All he had to say, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. This man has made a profound statement. When God gives, I bless his name. When God takes, I still bless his name, because God being worthy of my worship is not dependent on what he gives to me nor what he takes from me. God, the worship of God and his holiness, his majesty, and his excellence is consistent in spite of my circumstance or my situation. Then here comes round two. You think, okay, Job, the rest of the book is going to be Job recovering from the loss of his wealth and the loss of his children. But here comes the Hasatan again. Let me touch his body. And God grants him permission. Job has nothing but his integrity and his wife at this point. He's sitting on an ash heap with pieces of broken pottery trying to scrape the sores on his body. Job's wife, the only real time she has any input into the scenario is when she tells Job, curse God and die. I think we've been really hard on Job's wife. Think about this. It wasn't just Job who lost his wealth and his children. This woman lost her wealth and her children, and now she has to watch while her husband suffers. The fact that she says, curse God and die, is a great statement of faith. She knows that if Job were to curse God, that God is powerful and God is real, and that Job would die. And so I think there's a lot more that we could say about Job's wife than what we have. So just remember, she's lost her children and her wealth, and now she has to endure the agony of watching her husband suffer. Then, if it's not enough for the wife to say, curse God and die, then here come the friends. There's Eliphaz. He declared that Job was suffering because he has sinned. Don't you just love friends like that? Something you think your whole life is falling apart, and someone comes up to you and they're like, oh, you must have opened a door, something must have happened, you must have done this, you must have done that. Surely you are going through this because you have sinned. Well, Job insisted that Eliphaz take back his false accusations. Then here comes Bildad. Job will not admit that he has sinned, so his suffering will continue. And Job's response to Bildad is, let God bring his charges on. If I've done anything wrong, let him tell me what it is. I don't know of anything that I've done wrong. I think we're kind of getting the idea that the book of Job was very much written, I think it was historical, but it was very much written to correct a false theology. The false theology simply said this: if you are right with God, if you do what is right, if you are upright in your dealings with other people, then you will be blessed and you will not suffer. That those who suffer do so because they have sinned and done something wrong. And the book of Job is proof positive that suffering does come to the righteous, that there are times, instances, when the righteous are called upon by God for reasons unbeknownst to them to go through horrific ordeals. Then you have Zophar. He says that Job's sin deserves more suffering than he's presently experiencing. Oh, don't you just love these friends? Job, you think that what you're going through is bad? Just if God gave you what you really deserved, it would be even worse than this. And Job responds with the confidence that he will be justified. Job's response in the midst of his friends is, I can't justify myself, but I will be justified. The one who can and does justify humans, he will take care of this for me. Then there's the fourth friend, Elihu. I think Elihu comes closer than any of Job's other friends. He says that God is using this suffering to mold and to train Job. But Job doesn't even respond to Elihu. That's probably not what he wanted to hear. Then we have the final round in the book of Job. Job recognizes a need for an arbitrator. He recognizes that there's this huge gulf between himself and between God, and that he needs to have communication with God, but this gulf is so broad and so wide. God is God and he is man, and that he needs someone who can bridge the gulf between himself and God and can communicate. He was asking for Jesus and didn't know it, so he's asking for an arbitrator, and then God shows up. It's interesting to me that even when God shows up, manifests his presence to Job, he never answers Job's question, why? Why am I going through this? What have I done? He never answers the question, why? He responds to Job's suffering. Now listen to this. He responds to Job's suffering not with answers to his why, but he responds to his suffering with his presence. That is God's response to human suffering, is divine presence. All the whys in the world is not going to make the hurt and the pain go away. All the explanations in the world is not going to make things different, but God's presence changes you from the inside, and you realize that it's in His presence you find what you need, and what you need is not the answer to your question why. What you need is Him, and that's what Job finds. This has helped me in dealing with people who are experiencing great suffering, losses, and tragedies. I don't have to give them an explanation for why they've gone through what they've gone through. As a matter of fact, anything that I have to say to someone who is severely suffering is only going to diminish or negate what they're going through, and I don't want to do that. But if I'm there with presence and just simply say, I don't have answers, but I am here and I am with you, and I stand in solidarity with you before the Lord, and I know that He will give you the strength that you need in this moment. And that has seemed to carry some of the most profound results of anything pastorally that I've ever done, is just offer presence. But isn't it our human tendency to want to offer answers instead? I think that we need to go a little bit higher on the presence and a little bit lower on our need to offer explanations and to provide answers. When it comes to issues like suffering, we're not really looking for philosophical and apologetic didactics. We are screaming for divine presence. The end result, God restores Job. The names of his daughters are given. That's interesting that the names of his daughters, not the names of his sons, are given. Their names are Jemimah, which means beautiful or brilliant, Keziah, which means fragrant, and Karen Hapuk. And while we're not really sure what Karen Hapuk means, they seem to indicate elements of inward character as well as outward beauty. The products of Job's life at the beginning was okay, but what he produced after his encounter with suffering was phenomenal. If we will embrace the cross of the Lord Jesus Christ, if we will allow Him to deal in our lives and to bring about His nature and His character through the things that we suffer, we'll find that what we produce after we have gone through the fires of tribulation and the fires of suffering will outshine and outlast anything that we could have ever produced if we had not gone through those events. Well, I'm going to stop there, and I'll be right back with Psalm 23.